Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Thanks, Matthew, for joining us today as we wrap up our three-part series for our veterans in remembrance of Memorial Day. We're going to talk today a little bit about advanced planning, and I think our main message is to really convey to people which is the single most important document that they should have in their possession, really at all times, but is especially needed when a veteran dies and the family, loved one, spouse is left to plan the funeral and pick up the pieces and go on with their life. So, Matthew, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background?
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you asking me to be able to be a part of this three-part series. I think it's fantastic that you came up with this idea and are doing it. But my name is Matthew Marini. I'm the Advanced Planning Funeral Director for Dignity Memorial. I represent a couple of funeral homes in New Jersey. And I've been in funeral service for a little over 8 years. I entered it pretty much on a gut feeling, a knot in my stomach that said this was the way I was going to best be able to help people during a time of need. And choosing to go into funeral service is truly the best decision I've ever made. I met my wife in mortuary school. I love what I do. I've had a chance to be able to support family and friends through really difficult times when they needed me the most. And really what I do now is there's two types of funeral directing, right? There's at need and pre-need. At need is what happens when the death actually occurs and we're assisting the family through the services. And pre-need is simply putting a plan in place ahead of time for the most inevitable event that all of us will share, which is not a good event. Death is not something we look forward to, not something we want to talk about. And that's a big part of my job, is getting people to have the conversation and start that dialogue.
Right. And unfortunately, death is inevitable for all of us. I personally have experienced both the pre-planning, the pre-need, and the at-need. My mother planned so diligently and so thoroughly for her funeral, right down to the hymns she wanted sung, who she wanted there pretty much, where it was going to be, the type of casket she was going to have, where she was going to be buried, of course, was next to my father at the cemetery. Went through it all, documented it, and paid for it ahead of time. The advantage of that for me and my brother is that we had very little to do except follow the directives she had already set. It made it so much easier for us at a time when it was difficult. We had just lost our mother. The opposite end of the rainbow, when my husband was ill, we had about 8 months from the time of his diagnosis for a brain tumor, a brain cancer, till his death. He did not want to speak of any aspect of his death. I don't think he ever really believed he was going to die, but he just flat out would not accept it.
Right.
Fortunately for me, he had been very involved with a local veterans group, the Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 20, here in Rochester, New York. So I had attended numerous funerals. I had heard about some of the horrors of figuring out what benefits there were and how to get them and everything. So I had a little bit of an advantage in that respect, and I made sure I had my hands on copies of certain paperwork.
Yeah.
So specifically speaking of veterans and veterans benefits, I'm going to let you take it from here, Matthew. And the scenario can be that a surviving spouse has just entered your office. No advance planning was done.
Right.
But walk us through the steps of what it might be like for that person to plan that funeral and figure out what veterans benefits he or she may be entitled to.
Right. And that's such a common situation that a lot of families face, is walking in and having not planned in advance and not having maybe looked into those benefits that are available.
Right.
And, on top of your normal funeral arrangement, which is usually an average of about 225 questions or more over the course of 2 to 2.5 hours or so. Then we have the other aspects like the veterans planning and the veteran service and what's available to them. And I think the single most important form that anybody can make sure that they have is their discharge paperwork.
Yep.
The DD-214.
DD-214. I used to utter those words in my sleep, I think.
It's so important to being able to unlock all the benefits that are available because they are generally available to an honorably discharged veteran. How else are you able to prove that?
Exactly.
Right?
It is proof of service.
Right. Absolutely. And, being able to get one, some veterans don't have it. So you have to actually send in a written request to get a new one. So, and that's going to take time. So one of those things that might be procrastinated is getting around to getting that discharge paperwork. But if you procrastinate too long, you don't get a chance to get a copy of it before that time does come, then what good is it really going to be for your family?
Right.
Because we all know submitting paperwork to the government does not move fast.
It does not move fast, and especially nowadays.
Right. What would a family member do if the veteran had passed and they realize they don't have that paperwork?
That's a really tough spot to be in because we're looking to have the services usually within a week or so. And to be able to request a veteran's honor detail, for example, have an honor guard there, usually requires at least a 48 hours heads up so that they have time to coordinate that.
Sure.
And so there's a lot of times where a family can't find the discharge paperwork, and at least the things that happen at the time of the service, specifically having an honor detail come out, being able to get a flag, those things, sometimes families aren't able to get those. They're not able to have an honor guard at the cemetery there. My funeral homes, if we have a veteran, we can't find the discharge paperwork, we will still provide them with a flag for the service. But actually requesting the honor detail, that's something that's a little bit out of our hands there.
Yeah.
Right. Now, you mentioned the DD-214 has to be requested by mail. Years ago, I say years ago, maybe as many as 5 years ago, it seems to me that you could get it online. You could do an online request.
Our veterans planning guide that we get out to all of our families, where did I have that? The issuance or replacement of military service medals, awards, and decorations must be requested in writing.
Yeah.
But in any event, we do have a form to be able to actually request that.
Yeah, but that DD-214 is very important. I actually fear that there may be a number of family members that aren't even aware that this document exists. And if their veteran doesn't want to talk about it, this is going to come as a huge shock.
Right. Yeah, no, it most certainly does. And there's a lot of veterans that don't want to talk about it. Yeah, it's standard form 180. And it is a request pertaining to military records. So this is the way. Although, so this veteran may be submitted. Requests from veterans or deceased veterans next of kin may be submitted online using eVet Rex. So
they'll still mail it to you, but you can request it.
Correct.
So that may have saved a day or two.
That very well could save a day or two, but in any event, you still need to put a request in for those.
Exactly.
So so for the DD-214, it is important to know that a request has to be sent in.
Right.
And I guess in this case, writing could be either virtually or also in writing. So
now the veterans usually will have this document.
A lot of veterans
if they have in fact saved it somewhere. So family members could also start digging through papers, and they might accidentally run across one.
Yeah, absolutely. Any veteran I know that has had their discharge paperwork has always had it amongst their most important paperwork. And so that's always a good place, whether it be in a fire safe box or a filing cabinet, whatever the case may be.
Absolutely.
Really a good place to start.
Yes. When I got my hands on Tom's, I made several copies, put them in different places. I scanned it, had an electronic copy, and gave a copy to one of his brothers as well.
Yeah, no, that's so smart. That's so smart.
I wanted to make sure that I had that.
I've come across situations where the DD-214 was just in such bad shape, it was illegible. You couldn't even
Yes.
make it out. So you
Yeah,
get, it
yeah.
wasn't, it didn't, they had it in one particular case. It didn't even do them any good because it was just so battered, you know?
Yeah, they're not good copies to begin with.
No, so
I will say that.
having
They're not
copies
good
like that
copies.
and being able to put them away and just having
Right.
just in case, right? Because,
Yep.
you know, on top of the things that, you know, having an honor detail present, being able to request a flag, there's a lot of other things
Right.
that a family can
Right.
request after a veteran has passed away, but they still need that discharge paperwork.
Right. So if they have, or once they have the DD-214, what does that avail them of? What benefits is that veteran entitled to?
So there's a lot of different burial benefits available to veterans. So to start, there's, I believe, 151 national cemeteries across the country. They're not located in every state, so it is important to find out if there is one in your state and how close it is. I know for us in New Jersey, there's only one state-run veteran cemetery. We don't have a nationally run veteran cemetery. And we have one privately run veteran cemetery. But the two cemeteries themselves are about 2 hours apart. And so it's kind of that for the entire state. Burial at a veteran-run cemetery, national or state-run, is one of the biggest benefits. Being able to have a free burial space available for the veteran's spouse, and or a dependent child. That right there is a huge benefit.
Sure it is.
Yeah, not only in ground, but also if you're being cremated, they usually have niche space. Also included at the veteran cemetery, if you're being placed in ground, is going to be the concrete container that's required by the cemetery. And then also the marking of the grave as well.
Right.
Having a marker, a flat marker, or an upright headstone. So being buried at a veteran cemetery, those are all the things that are included. And if you were to put a price value on those different items, actually purchasing the cemetery space, actually getting the cemetery space could be a few $1,000s or more. Right. The concrete burial container could be $1,000 or more. Marking it with a flat marker or a headstone is easily a few $1,000s. So right there, you're looking at maybe $10,000 or more just in those benefits, taking that financial burden off of the family.
Right.
What about if they were cremated, it's easier to transport them.
Mm-hmm.
But what if your cemetery that you want them buried in is an hour or more away?
We'll drive it.
Is there any mileage is it extra cost?
There usually is a cost for outside of the local area for the use of the hearse. The local area generally covers about 10 to 20 mile radius. So you would anticipate possibly extra costs for the mileage. It's up to the funeral home whether or not they want to take care of that because it's a veteran or whatever the case may be.
Right. That's not covered with that DD-214.
No, all the funeral services themselves don't have a cost to the family. The actual services provided by the funeral home still do have a cost. There's a big misconception that a veteran's casket is free. There's no specific organization that provides free caskets, although, locally run VFW, American Legion, Vietnam Veterans of America, some of those organizations may do something on their own to be able to provide something like that when a member passes away. But the funeral homes costs themselves are still a thing. So it's still a good purpose to pre-plan and, prepay your funeral.
Right. And if the family wants to do some type of military tribute to honor the service of that veteran, are there benefits? I think you mentioned an honor guard, or what might be available there for them.
So during the service itself, American Legion and VFW, I know specifically both, will provide, in a normal world, non-COVID, right? We'll usually have an honor detail that comes out, a lot of the different members from the group to do a service at the funeral home if there's a service there. But then during the actual burial at the cemetery, or maybe sometimes it's at the church, or maybe we're not going to either one of those, and it's at the funeral home, we can request an honor detail. And what the VA will do is they'll send out a multi-person detail to present and fold the flag that's there, to blow taps, and then make sure that the flag is presented to the next of kin. So that's a very moving aspect of this, as you personally know.
Yes, it is.
Always gives me chills.
Every single time.
Yep.
What other benefits? If someone came in and said, my husband is a veteran and he has a terminal disease, I would like to plan for his funeral. Here's the DD 214.
Mm-hmm.
How would you advise this person as far as pre-planning?
Well, as far as pre-planning, we would go through and have the conversation about what the wishes were and making sure that we tailored the services and every specific to that person's wants and needs and budget. And part of that conversation is going to be finding out about their loved one and the service to their country and how they like to display that service. A lot of times, Miss Kathy, you have that beautiful frame behind you with all of your husband's medals and his ribbons, being able to display that and those little bits throughout the funeral home.
We did.
Yep, I'm sure you did.
Yes.
You have to decorate it. You have it all decked out, right? We personally do a military themed DVD tribute for our family, so we can put that together.
Nice.
Yep.
Nice.
Being able to have, if they were a member of the American Legion or VFW or another veterans group, have, contact them and see if the organization wants to do something in conjunction with our services. And then finding out, do you already have cemetery space? If not, this is I would let a family know about the state-run cemetery that we have near us, going through the benefits of that and the details about that. And then if they do have their own private cemetery space already, there's still things that we can do there. We can still mark the grave with a flat marker or a headstone from the VA, And if they already have a headstone, let's say, maybe they really had it planned somewhat in advance and they already purchased their space and put a headstone there. We can still get a medallion to go on the headstone, or if it's in a crypt or an entombment or maybe a niche for cremated remains, there's still a medallion that we can get to mark that space there to still show that veterans' commitment to our country and the fact that they did serve honorably.
Okay. And you take care of whether it's pre-planned or at need. You, meaning the funeral home, takes care of the application for those benefits as far as, requesting the benefits from the VA or from the government. You handle that for the family or for the surviving spouse?
Certainly. We're going to request the flag. We'll be able to pick up a flag for the service. We'll request the honor guard on behalf of the family for the service. And then our staff will sit down after the services are all said and done. And if the family wants to apply for a marker or headstone or medallion, we'll sit down and go through that with them. There's also a form that is available for a presidential memorial certificate. So there's a certificate signed by the sitting president thanking the family for their veteran service. And in some instances, there can be financial reimbursement available for certain services, but it's very limited amount. I believe it's up to $300 for non-service related death and up to $2,000 for service-connected death. So,
right. And service-connected would be even if it was determined by the VA, for example, if the veteran was getting disability benefits from the VA because a condition that they had acquired was related to their service.
Yep, or if they were under if they were under the care of a VA physician or the VA hospital, if they were actually at the VA hospital when they passed away, there is some reimbursement for actually picking the veteran up from their place of passing and bringing them back to the funeral home. So it is in limited circumstances, but there can be money available. And in most times, what I'll do with the family is during my follow-up with them, we'll sit down and go over which different benefits they want to apply for. And we'll fill out the forms. And I'm not terribly sure whether there's going to be financial reimbursement available, but why don't we put in a request and see what happens? What's the worst thing that happens?
If you don't
worst
ask,
the answer is no. Yeah,
but
absolutely.
If you don't ask, the answer is always no.
Right.
Now, for some surviving spouses, in the instance of a veteran who is retired from the military, for example, there is possibility for further benefits, such as, it might be some medical care. It might be a monthly stipend, for example.
Sure.
Do you also help with that or inform them that this may be a possibility? Or is that for a different resource to help?
That's usually for a different resource to help. That's a little bit out of our scope of what we do for our families. But you're absolutely correct.
Okay.
There are a lot of different things out there,
Right.
and a lot of different resources. And I want you to keep in mind too, with the burial, the veterans burial benefits that we're talking about here, and those being available for a spouse and also a dependent child, the veteran doesn't need to predecease their loved ones, their spouse, their dependent child. If that's the order of events and the spouse passes away first, they're still eligible. Right. And also the burial is not just in a cemetery. Burial at sea is also a benefit that's available to all honorably discharged veterans. And it is handled by the Navy, actually, surprisingly.
Now, in the instance, and I didn't realize this, actually, I never considered it. I never even thought about it. But in that instance, what allowances are made for the family? Is there any allowance for the family to attend that burial at sea? Or is that something that has to be worked out separately and would be at the expense of the family?
No, so for the burial at sea, the family is actually generally not involved, or they're not there. Right. It'll happen when a ship goes out, and then at some point, during their time out, they will do the burial at sea, make a marking of the coordinates of where that occurred, and then provide a certificate afterwards.
Right. That's enlightening, because I never even considered that as a possibility.
Yeah.
However, I would say that if the family were invited, I would request a burial at sea in a beautiful tropical location. But, at any rate, nonetheless, mentioning the benefits that they might be eligible for as a surviving spouse of a veteran, I understand it's not in your scope, if you will. Do you at least let them know that there may be other benefits and they need to find that resource, or do you make any suggestions to them about that?
Yeah, I will. I do make a note of the fact that there's a lot of other things that are available to the families.
Okay.
And it just behooves them to kind of look a little bit further into it. And even if,
absolutely,
I've mentioned I have what's called a veterans planning guide that my company's put together, which has a plethora of different information. And while I try to give that to veterans, I still give it to their families, even if it's after they've passed away and they never had one before, because it can still provide some guidance as to the different things that are available. And it has a form to request every different benefit that is available to a veteran and their family.
And you make that available to people that come to you for guidance. Is there anything on your website where people can request that?
Absolutely.
Knowing that Dignity Memorial is a nationwide organization.
Yeah, well, we are the largest provider of funeral service in North America. We have 2,200 locations across 44 states, and we have affinity relationships nationwide with several different groups, including VFW and American Legion. And so not only can you request that information through our website, but you'll also find us throughout their websites as well. And a lot of times, I'll at least actually right now, in like the last couple of weeks, almost once a day, I've been getting a request for a veterans planning guide from our veterans. Yeah. Some of them want further information about pre-planning, some of them don't. But as long as I can get this to them, I know that they have one more tool in their bag to just be able to benefit.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, at least things to think about for sure. And maybe start that conversation with the veteran in their family. What would you then, Matthew, say to any veteran out there, or perhaps the spouse of a veteran can relay to the veteran if the veteran doesn't listen to our podcast? What would you want the veterans to hear from you about pre-planning and how it might benefit their family for those left behind?
Pre-planning is single-handedly one of the greatest gifts that you can leave to your family in the wake of your passing. You already said it, Miss Kathy. You've been through both ends of the spectrum. You've got into a funeral home on one of the worst days of your life, unfortunately, with no plan in place. And on another one of the worst days of your life, the hardest decision you had to make was what day of the week everything was going to happen on. And so if that is not something that a person would want to leave to their family, the peace of mind knowing that difficult decisions financials are all taken care of. And all they have to do is celebrate their life. I couldn't think of something that I could leave to my family that's better than that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And especially knowing how veterans have that innate sense of protecting the people they love.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why would a veteran not want to do it? Even if they don't feel they can talk about it to their spouse, but maybe somehow they can summon up the courage to go take care of that.
Start writing it down. Start making notes of things. Have a conversation with a professional. Start a conversation with your loved one. Because what happens if they pass away? They predecease you. I think one of the hardest, but also the most important aspects of my job, pre-planning, is getting people to start the conversation and just have a conversation about having a plan. We've planned for everything in life. So many things that do we plan for in life that will never happen, but we have a plan just in case. So why not have a plan for them? The only thing that we know will happen, right?
We know for certainty is going to happen.
Right. And like you hit on the nail on the head. Our veterans not only served our country and protected our country, but they've been protecting our family. It's in their nature.
It is.
Those people are the people that run towards the sound of gunfire, not away from it. And so this is just another plan, just like any battle plan, in place to be able to affect the situation.
Exactly. Right. And here we are with a podcast that deals with grief. And we're kind of talking about the pre-grief, although sometimes there's anticipatory grief if your loved one has a terminal illness. But it all ties together because by pre-planning, you can help lessen that intensity of grief at a moment where they need a little tiny bit of relief.
Yeah, absolutely.
Eases some of that burden when they're, I mean, that's one of the most vulnerable times in your life is having to do that. And if you have answers to what they wanted, or it's already planned, then it makes it so much easier on them.
Yeah. Exactly. Not having to wonder if you're doing the right thing and if this is what they would have wanted.
Right.
And believe me, my grandparents had asked me if I'd be so kind as to help my family through the process of planning their funeral. But for the longest time, my grandfather would never have the conversation with me as to what specifically he wanted. And I'm so glad that I was able to finally get him to just talk to me and just share with me, because what he does want, which is he's a veteran as well. He served in Korea and he's very proud of his service. And we're all very proud of what he's done for our country. And I always knew that he wanted to be buried at a veteran cemetery. But what I didn't know is he wants a simple graveside service. He doesn't want to have anything more than that. And so, I'm glad that he shared that with me, because I totally would not have done that. I would have done something bigger. I would have and he wouldn't have wanted that, and it wouldn't have been the right thing. And so, there's that too. It's just that peace of mind. I like to say there's two ways to have this conversation. There's an easy way, and then there's a hard way. And unfortunately, I got into pre-planning because I know anticipatory grief. I know what that's like. My wife and I lost a child together, and it was anticipatory. And we were so naive to think that because we were funeral directors, that was something that we helped people with on a daily basis. It was not the same. And so that's why I do what I do now, is after I worked through my grief, I found an outlet the same way that you have. You made a podcast and I went to pre-planning for both of our grief as outlets. And so now we took our own grief and our own loss, and we've spun that to be able to provide relief for others.
Help others,
to try to help others.
In today's world, that there are so many blended families, there are, stepchildren and step parents and everything. I think that the pre-planning is so important to help not create, at such a difficult time, to not create more issues or new issues with wondering, are you doing the right thing for in your second marriage that, the stepchildren are not going to be happy about, or whatever. That if this is what was laid out, then there's no question. Just
Right.
So I think it's very important today.
Miss Stephanie, that point right there is so far and beyond an awesome point, because I mean, I just did a webinar with an estate lawyer and a personal financial navigator, and that was a huge aspect of what we were talking about, is the fact that there are blended families, and if man and woman, they get married in a second marriage, they both have kids. Yep. You might think that my dad was once married before somebody other than my mother. If he had passed away while married to her, she would have had full say as to what his services would be. No, sure. He was my dad. He's been my dad for 30-something years. Since I was born, he's been my dad. I need to have a say. I don't get a say. Right. So, that right there is a perfect example of the complexities that come with not having a prearrangement.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Exactly. Sadly, our time is running out. I hate when that happens.
Me too.
When we've got such a good conversation going. We are going to put in our episode notes and on our website your contact information, Matthew, in case people have questions, that they will look to you as a resource. You can direct them as you will. Maybe put them in contact with one of your funeral homes in the area where they are, or whatever.
Yeah. Again, we are located in 44 states. So if you go to dignitymemorial.com, there's a tab for find a funeral home. All you have to do is search where you're at, and it'll bring up all the nearest funeral homes, crematories, and cemeteries that we have. That veterans planning guide that we have is free to all of our veterans. We'd be more than happy to get one out to you. And also just keep in mind that as far as for the organizations that may be listening, Dignity Memorial does have a nationwide homeless veterans burial program. So it's something that we do where, it's something particular in those particular set of circumstances that are put in place. But if a homeless veteran does pass away, we will go through the process of making sure that they are buried with the honor and dignity that they deserve.
Oh, I love
That's
that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So
I love that. I love that. To our listeners out there, we hope that you have this form number in your head now.
DD-214, Department of Defense 214.
Right. It proves this military service. So if there's someone you love, or if you have a friend who has someone they love who happens to be one who has served in the military, get a copy of that and get it now and save it, because someday you're going to need that document. And as far as conversations about planning and pre-planning, even if your conversation begins with the, I can tell you what I don't want, it's still a conversation that has started.
Yep.
Don't let it go. Have that conversation. This episode then wraps up our 3-part series about our veterans. We honor them for the Memorial Day that has recently passed. And in November, we'll be happy to celebrate all veterans. But for now, we want to remember those veterans who died while serving their country, and we do remember them for the Memorial Day that passed. We don't know them all, but we owe them all. Thanks for listening as we continue to live and grieve.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveandgrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.